The signal arrived on every frequency simultaneously. Admiral Marcus Kessler stood in the Combat Information Center of the UES Resolute, watching the waveform cascade across 17 screens at once. Every band, every protocol, military encrypted channels, civilian broadband, deep space navigational beacons, even the archaic AM frequencies that hadn't carried meaningful traffic in 2 centuries. The same pattern repeating, identical on every display. Source, Kessler said. Bearing 037, elevation plus 12. Range. Lieutenant Commander Hyatt paused, recalculated, ran the numbers a second time, then looked up from her console with something close to disbelief. Range is irrelevant, sir. The signal isn't coming from a point source. Every relay in the system is rebroadcasting it simultaneously. Station Argus, the Meridian Comsat ring, even our own internal repeaters. They're all carrying it, as if someone flipped a switch inside every transmitter we own. The pattern itself was simple, mathematically elegant. A Fibonacci spiral rendered in electromagnetic radiation, each pulse exactly 1.618 times the duration of the one before it, followed by a silence exactly equal to the golden ratio of the total transmission duration, followed by the spiral again. It was not random. It was not natural. And it had been running for 19 minutes before anyone noticed it wasn't a system malfunction. Kessler keyed the fleet channel. All stations, Admiral Kessler. Signal is not a drill, not a test, not an exercise. Set condition 2 throughout the formation. I want the Kepler and the Vanguard's full sensor suites pointed at bearing 037, and I want answers in 5 minutes. Nothing fires without my personal authorization. Acknowledge. 17 ships acknowledged. He got answers in 3 minutes. The object appeared on thermal first, a heat signature that made no physical sense. Perfectly uniform across its entire surface, not a fraction of a degree warmer or cooler at any point. The temperature read 2.725 Kelvin. Exactly. The precise temperature of the cosmic microwave background radiation. It was hiding in the universe's own noise, indistinguishable from the ambient hum of creation itself. Then it stopped hiding. The thermal mask dropped, and the sphere revealed itself to every sensor the fleet possessed. 900 meters in diameter, perfectly smooth, perfectly spherical to a tolerance the Resolute's instruments couldn't even measure, hanging in space at the exact geometric center of Earth's orbital defense perimeter as if it had always been there, and simply decided to let them notice. 72 hours, that was how long they had. The voice came on the same all-frequency broadcast, in every human language simultaneously, each version tuned to the dominant dialect of its target region, not translated, not run through any recognizable linguistic processing. Spoken. As if 57 separate beings were addressing 57 separate audiences in their native tongues, all saying exactly the same thing at exactly the same moment. You have 72 hours. At the end of that time, a decision will be made regarding your species. The nature of that decision depends entirely on what we observe during this period. The observation has begun. Nothing else. No identification. No demands. No threats. No explanation of what constituted an acceptable observation. Just a countdown and a condition no one understood, delivered with the calm certainty of a natural law being stated aloud. Admiral Kessler had been in command of the 3rd Combined Fleet for 11 years. He had fought the Karenni border action at 39, had commanded orbital defense during the Procyon incident at 44, had signed casualty notifications for 612 personnel during his career, had watched good ships and better people burn in vacuum while he made the calculations that kept the rest alive. None of it, not 1 second of 30 years of service, prepared him for a sphere that appeared from nowhere and gave his entire species a deadline. "Get me strategic command," he said, "and someone wake the Secretary General." The first 6 hours were chaos. Every government on Earth, and in the colonies demanded information that didn't exist yet. The UN Security Council convened an emergency session, and within 40 minutes 3 separate heads of state had demanded a preemptive strike. The Russian Federation placed its deep space nuclear deterrent on hair-trigger alert. The Chinese orbital defense grid, the Tianwen system, fully autonomous, designed to engage without human authorization in the event of a decapitation strike. Went a full active mode before Admiral Chen Wyoming of the Pacific Combined Fleet countermanded it through back channels that technically didn't exist. A religious sect in the American heartland declared the sphere an angel of judgment and began a pilgrimage toward Cape Canaveral, as if physical proximity to the sky would earn them grace. 3 million people clogged the highways of Central Florida within 8 hours. In London, the Prime Minister asked his science advisor what the sphere was. The advisor said he didn't know. The Prime Minister asked what it could do. The advisor said he didn't know that either. The Prime Minister asked what they should do about it. The advisor said the only honest answer was to watch and wait. Kessler kept his fleet at condition 2. Weapons charged, not locked. Targeting systems warm, not painting. Sensors passive, not probing. He watched the sphere on the main display and waited for it to do something, anything, that would give him a decision tree, a branching set of responses, the military logic that had governed his entire adult life. The sphere sat there, silent except for the signal, the countdown ticking in the back of everyone's mind like a clock in a house where someone is dying. At hour 9, the Resolute's chief science officer, Dr. Amara Akafer, delivered her preliminary analysis to the CIC. She was a compact woman with close-cropped silver hair who had published more papers on exotic physics than anyone else in the fleet, and she spoke in the clipped cadence of someone who had already discarded her first 4 hypotheses and was trying not to show how frightened the 5th one made her. The sphere isn't emitting radiation. It isn't absorbing it either. It's deflecting it, perfectly. Every photon that touches its surface is returned along its exact incident vector with 0 energy loss. 0. That's not a material property we've ever encountered. That's not even theoretically achievable within our current models. That's a deliberate choice by something that can manipulate electromagnetic radiation at the quantum level. Meaning what practically? Kessler asked. Meaning it wants to be seen but not studied. It's showing us a mirror. She pulled up a holographic display. And the thermal signature we detected initially, the 2.725 Kelvin reading, that wasn't camouflage in the traditional sense. Our analysis suggests it was a demonstration. It was showing us that it could match the background radiation of the observable universe to arbitrary precision. Not just the temperature, but the spectral distribution, the anisotropy patterns, everything. That's not stealth technology. That's a calling card. It was saying, we have been here all along in the space between your measurements and you never knew. We chose to let you see us now. Kessler absorbed this. The implications cascaded through his tactical mind and found nothing to anchor to. There was no response protocol for an entity that hid inside the fabric of reality. The voice, any progress on source analysis? The voice has no source. Akafer's expression tightened. It doesn't propagate from the sphere. It doesn't propagate from anything. It appears spontaneously in the receiving equipment of every communications device within range. Different equipment, different frequency responses, different hardware architectures, different physical locations. Same voice, same words, simultaneously. Down to the nanosecond. Not broadcast, not relayed. Generated locally in each device by a mechanism we cannot identify, as if the information simply appears in the circuit at the appropriate point. She looked at him. Whatever this is, Admiral, it doesn't operate within our physics. Not the physics we teach. Not the physics we theorize. It operates in a framework where our physics is a subset. A small one. The countdown reached 60 hours remaining. The sphere had done nothing but exist and speak. And that, Kessler was beginning to understand, was itself the message. At hour 14, Kessler made a decision that would define the next 58 hours. He stood alone in the CIC for 4 minutes, staring at the sphere's image on the main display, running calculations that had nothing to do with mathematics. Then he turned to his operations officer. Fleet-wide order, stand down from Condition 2 to Condition 3, all weapons safed, all targeting systems offline, shields lowered to navigational minimums only. He paused. And open our transponder signatures to full broadcast, every ship, full emission profile, hiding nothing, showing everything. The operations officer stared at him. Sir, that exposes our entire formation, our defensive capabilities, our fleet composition, our everything. Yes, do it. The order nearly cost him his command. Admiral Chen of the Pacific Combined Fleet called within minutes, his face rigid on the screen, a vein pulsing at his temple. Marcus, you're exposing the entire Third Fleet. If that thing decides to attack, and we have no reason to believe it won't, you've handed it targeting solutions for every ship in your formation. If that thing decides to attack Wyoming, our weapons won't matter. You read Ockhaffer's report. It exists outside our physics. It manipulates reality at levels we can't even measure. If it wanted us destroyed, we would have been destroyed the moment it arrived, probably before. Kessler kept his voice even, measured, projecting a calm he wasn't entirely sure he felt. It said a decision depends on what it observes. I've been thinking about what that means. And I believe with everything I have that it intends to show it something worth observing. Not our weapons, not our defenses, something else. And if it observes weakness, submission, then I'll be wrong and we'll all be dead. But I don't think I'm wrong, Wyoming. I've been watching that thing for 14 hours. It hasn't moved. It hasn't threatened. It hasn't demanded anything. It simply told us it was watching and gave us time. That's not a predator's behavior. That's a teacher's. Chen stared at him for a long time. His jaw worked. Then slowly, reluctantly, he nodded. Pacific Fleet standing down to Condition 3. God help us, Marcus. If he's watching, Admiral, he's taking notes alongside them. Within 6 hours, every human military formation in the solar system had followed suit. Not because of any order from Strategic Command. The politicians were still arguing, still demanding strikes, still paralyzed by the incomprehensible. But because the fleet commanders talked to each other on back channels, and one by one, they made the same calculation Kessler had made. The same leap of faith wrapped in the language of tactical assessment. Whatever was inside that sphere was watching, and it was patient. And patience, in Kessler's experience, was not a quality that aggressive species cultivated. Hour 20, the voice spoke again. The entire planet heard it. We have observed 63 species achieve interstellar capability within this region of the galaxy over a period of approximately 4 billion standard years. Each was contacted in the manner you are being contacted now. Each was given the same period of observation. The outcomes were as follows. The golden ratio pause, the silence that was itself a mathematical statement. 41 responded to first contact with immediate aggression. They were removed. 14 responded with deception, feigning peace while preparing weapons in concealment. They were removed. 6 responded with genuine peace but proved incapable of maintaining it when tested. They were removed. 2 responded in a manner that warranted continued observation beyond the initial period. Those 2 still exist. Another pause. You are the 64th. The words hit the CIC like a decompression event. Lieutenant Commander Hyatt's hands trembled on her console, a woman who had held steady through live combat at Procyon, who had never once flinched at an incoming alarm. Someone in the back row, Kessler never learned who, made a sound that might have been a prayer or might have been a sob. The tactical display kept turning, indifferent. The sphere kept hanging there, patient, waiting, counting. Kessler stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back, and felt the weight of the statement settle onto his shoulders like armor made of lead. 63 species, 41 destroyed for aggression, 14 for hidden weapons, 6 for failing some test of endurance. Only 2 in 4 billion years had passed whatever this was. And now humanity stood in the same examination room, with 52 hours left on the clock. "Admiral," Hyatt said quietly, her voice stripped of everything except urgency, "the Chinese autonomous grid, the Tianwang system. Chen countermanded it through back channels, but those channels aren't authoritative over the AI. It's still at full power, still in active mode. And if its targeting algorithms register the sphere as a viable threat before we can get a legitimate shutdown order through Beijing." "I know." Kessler was already moving toward the comm station. "Get me Admiral Chen. Get me the Chinese defense minister. Get me anyone in the PRC command structure who has legitimate authority over that system. Now, right now." The autonomous grid took 9 hours to deactivate. 9 hours of arguing across 6 time zones and 4 languages. 9 hours of countermanding orders that the AI refused to accept because they didn't carry the proper cryptographic authorization. 9 hours of pleading with an artificial intelligence that had been designed from its first line of code to protect against exactly the kind of threat that a 900-meter sphere of impossible physics represented. The AI did not understand why its creators wanted it to stand down. It had been built to fight things like this. Fighting was its purpose. Kessler spoke to it personally, or rather, to its human operators in the Tianwang Control Center beneath the Kunlun Mountains, who relayed his words into the system's decision matrix as weighted inputs. The grid exists to protect humanity. Its sole purpose is the survival of the species. Right now, in this specific moment, under these specific conditions, protecting humanity means not firing. Every second that grid remains at active status, it increases the probability of our extinction. Not by a threat from outside, by our own hand. Tell the system that, if its core directive is protect, then the correct calculation is stand down. The grid went cold at hour 29. 3 operators in the Kunlun Center wept with relief when the targeting systems finally released their lock. But the sphere had noticed. Of course it had noticed. The voice, when it came again at hour 30, was unchanged in its cadence. The same measured rhythm, the same careful enunciation, the same tone that Kessler was only now beginning to truly hear for what it was. Not threatening, not cold, not clinical, sad, weary. The voice of a being that had done this 63 times before and remembered every single species that had failed, remembered their music, their architecture, their children's laughter, the way their stars looked from their homeworlds before the silence came. Sorrowful patience, that was the only name for it. The autonomous weapons system has been deactivated. This is noted. The observation continues. Kessler stared at the sphere on his display. Then, for the first time, he spoke directly to it. "You heard all of that, the 9 hours of argument." "We hear everything," the voice said, and this time, unmistakably, it was speaking only to him, through his personal comm unit, the encrypted channel that only 3 people in the fleet had the key for. "We heard every word of the 9 hours. We heard Admiral Chen's fear and his courage in equal measure. We heard the operators beneath the mountain arguing with their machine. We heard you ask the machine to calculate its own purpose." A pause. "And we heard why you framed it that way, not as a command. Not as an override, as a question. You asked the machine to think. That is uncommon." "Is it enough?" Kessler asked. "The observation continues, Admiral. But I will tell you something that I have told very few. The manner in which a species deactivates its own weapons tells us more than any other single data point. Whether it is done in fear, in submission, in calculation, in faith, each manner carries a different meaning. And what manner was ours?" A long silence. Then, "Yours was done in pain. You did not want to, your every instinct rebelled against it, and you did it anyway because you decided the moment was larger than the instinct. That is the manner we hope for, each time, and so rarely find. The voice went silent. The all-frequency signal continued its golden ratio Fibonacci pulse, unchanged, patient, counting. Hour 36, halfway. The world was watching now. The signal had leaked within hours of first contact. It always did. There was no containing something that broadcast on every frequency, and every news feed on Earth and in the colonies showed the same image. The sphere hanging in space, immovable, patient, counting. Anchors tried to explain what was happening. They failed. Religious leaders tried to contextualize it. They failed differently. Scientists tried to theorize. They admitted, one after another, that they had nothing. Churches were full. Bars were full. People held vigil in city squares and on rooftops, staring at screens that showed them nothing but a silver ball and a clock counting backward. Some prayed. Some drank. Some held each other. Some simply stood in the dark and looked up at the sky and tried to feel the presence of the thing that was deciding their fate. Kessler hadn't slept. He stood in the observation gallery of the Resolute, a narrow windowed compartment on the carrier's dorsal hull, meant for crew recreation, now empty except for him. He looked out at the sphere with his own eyes. At this distance, it was visible as a bright point of light, slightly larger than a star, slightly too steady to be natural, but you had to know where to look. Dr. Acaffer found him there at hour 37. She carried 2 cups of coffee from the officers' mess, handed him one without asking if he wanted it. He took it. The warmth in his hands was grounding. "I've been studying the Fibonacci signal itself," she said. "Not just its technical properties, its mathematical meaning. And I think it's not just a calling card or a homing beacon. I think it's a test in itself." "How?" "The golden ratio appears in every mathematical system sophisticated enough to observe natural growth patterns. Every species that develops mathematics past a certain point discovers it independently. Fibonacci sequences are self-referential, each term defined entirely by the terms that came before it. The sequence only makes sense if you understand that the past creates the present." She sipped her coffee. "The signal is asking a question, Marcus. It's asking, do you recognize that you are part of a pattern? Do you understand that what you do now is defined by everything you've done before? That this moment is the sum of all your previous moments?" Kessler drank his coffee. It was too hot and slightly bitter. "That's a lot of philosophy packed into a radio signal. It's a lot of physics packed into a sphere, but it's there." She turned to him, her expression shifting from analytical to something more personal. "The 61 species that were removed, I keep thinking about them, about what made them fail, and about what made the 2 that passed different. So do I every hour. It can't just be not shooting. 14 species faked peace, didn't fire a shot and were still removed. 6 achieved genuine peace and still failed some secondary test. Whatever the criterion is, it's not simply don't shoot. It's deeper. More specific. It's what you do when you can't know the right answer," Kessler said. The words came out slowly, as if he were finding them for the first time, pulling them from somewhere beneath conscious thought. "It's what you choose when every instinct says fight, when every evolutionary impulse screams danger, when your entire history as a species tells you that unknown things must be destroyed before they destroy you, and you choose differently anyway. Not because you're weak, not because you lack the capacity for violence. Because you decided, consciously, deliberately, painfully, that this moment is bigger than survival. That being right matters more than being safe." Acaffer looked at him for a long time in the dim light of the observation gallery, the sphere's faint glow reflecting in her eyes. "You already know what you're going to do at hour 72, she said, "don't you?" "I've known since hour 14. "Is it going to work?" "I have no idea, but it's the truth. And I think that's what they're looking for, not the right answer, the true one." Hour 42, a crisis. The UES Kepler, running passive scans at the fleet's outer perimeter, detected a weapons lock, not from the sphere, from behind them, a human signature, a familiar one. Identify, Kessler ordered, already moving toward the tactical display. It's the Prometheus, sir, heavy destroyer outer formation. Captain Volkov's ship. Hyatt's voice was tight. He's brought his primary weapons online. Targeting radar is painting the sphere. He's building a firing solution. Kessler felt his stomach drop, not in fear but in something worse. Understanding. He knew Volkov, a good officer in a fight, brave, direct. The wrong officer for a moment that required something other than bravery. Get me Volkov, direct channel now. Volkov's face appeared on screen within seconds, angular, stubborn, shining with sweat. His eyes carrying the particular intensity of a man who has decided something and is afraid of what he's decided. Admiral, I will not apologize. I am not going to sit here and wait for that thing to decide whether my species lives or dies. My crew has families. My crew has children on Earth. I have a son who is 7 years old, and I will not sit here in the dark while something judges whether he gets to grow up. Captain Volkov. Kessler's voice was quiet, not commanding, not harsh, not the voice of an admiral exercising authority, the voice of one frightened man speaking to another. Yuri, I understand. I have a daughter in Prague. She is 23 years old and she just started her residency at the teaching hospital, and she called me 14 hours ago because she is afraid. I know what you're feeling. I know what fear does to good men. Then you know why I have to. No, still quiet, still gentle, but absolute, because this is not about us. You and I, our fear, our love, our need to protect what we've made, that is exactly what 63 other species felt. Every one of them had children. Every one of them had something they loved more than their own lives. And for 41 of them, that love drove them to fire. And it ended their civilizations. It ended their children. Volkov's jaw worked. The targeting radar from the Prometheus still painted the sphere. Kessler could see it on his tactical display. A bright line of accusation reaching from Volkov's ship toward the silver sphere. We are being watched, Yuri, not for what we're capable of doing, for what we're capable of choosing not to do. The hardest choice isn't whether to fight. It's whether to trust, when you have no reason to, when everything screams at you to act, when the cost of being wrong is everything you love. And if we're wrong, Volkov's voice was barely held together, if we trust and it kills us all anyway, then we will have died as the species that chose to be better than its fear. And that, I believe, is a better death than the alternative, but I don't think it will come to that. Kessler leaned forward. Your crew has families, so does mine, so does every soul on Earth. And every one of them is alive right now, because in 42 hours, not a single human being has pulled the trigger. You want to protect your son. Then be the man who held his fire when holding felt like dying. Because that is what he needs from you. That is what they all need from us. Silence on the channel, 20 seconds, 30. The targeting radar line on the tactical display held steady. Then it went dark. Volkov's voice, when it came back, was a whisper, ragged, broken and rebuilt in the space of a breath. Standing down, Admiral, weapons safe. God help us all. If he's listening, Captain, I suspect he's watching the same thing they are. Hour 48, 2/3 through. The voice spoke again and the whole world heard it. We wish to tell you something that we have told only one other species in the history of our observation. It is this. We are not your enemy. We have never been anyone's enemy. We have never wished harm upon any civilization we have encountered. The sorrow in the voice was undisguised, now naked, ancient, bottomless. We are the ones who arrive after the silence. After the species that built weapons found the species that built better weapons, and the silence that follows was all that remained. We count the dead. We sift the ruins. We catalog the art and the music and the mathematics and the love that was lost when the shooting started. We preserve what we can of them. And then we move on to the next young species, The next countdown, the next hope. A pause, longer than the golden ratio this time, much longer, as if the speaker was weighing whether to continue, whether this species deserved to know the rest. We found, across 4 billion years of observation, that the only way to prevent the silence was to arrive first, before the weapons are pointed outward, before the fear becomes doctrine, before the memory of predators hardens into the assumption that all unknown things must be destroyed. To stand in the space between a young species and the galaxy and say, choose. Choose now, in this moment, before your choices narrow and your fear calcifies into something that cannot be unclenched. Show us what you are when you have not yet decided what you must become. Kessler closed his eyes. Acker's theory crystallized in his mind with perfect clarity. The Fibonacci signal, each term defined by what came before. The test wasn't whether humanity would fight or not fight. The test was whether humanity, in the moment of maximum uncertainty, when every evolutionary imperative demanded aggression, when fear was rational, when trust was insane, would reach for the better version of itself anyway. Not because it was safe, not because it was logical, because it was right, because the moment demanded something more than survival instinct. Hour 52. Kessler made a decision that, as far as he knew, no military commander in the history of his species had ever made. He opened a channel to the sphere, not a demand, not a negotiation, not a surrender, a gift. He drafted the words in his head for 3 minutes. Then he spoke them without notes, without rehearsal, without certainty. The fleet channel was open. Earth was listening. The sphere was listening. Every human being alive would hear what he said next. This is Admiral Marcus Kessler, United Earth Ship Resolute, speaking on behalf of the 3rd Combined Fleet and with the authorization granted to me 40 minutes ago by the United Nations Security Council, speaking on behalf of the species. He paused. One breath. We don't know what you're looking for. We don't know what the right answer is to your test. We don't know if we'll pass or fail or if there's some third outcome we haven't imagined. But we know what we are. And rather than pretend otherwise, I'm going to tell you. Another breath. The CIC was silent. Every soul on every ship was listening. We spent the first 30 hours after you arrived arguing about whether to shoot you. Some of us wanted to. Some of us nearly did. We have an autonomous weapons system that wanted to fire so badly that it took 9 hours of human beings arguing with it before it would stop. One of our captains pointed a targeting solution at you 4 hours ago, and I had to talk him back from the edge with nothing but words. He swallowed. We are not perfect. We are not the species you might wish we were. We argue. We doubt. We come within inches of the wrong choice and only barely pull back. Our courage is not clean. It's messy. It's afraid. It makes the right decision while shaking. His voice steadied, found its ground. But we chose not to fire. Not because we can't, we can, and you know it. Not because we're afraid of you, we are, and pretending otherwise would be a lie. But because this moment deserves better than a trigger pull. You came here to see what we are. Then here it is. We're the species that argues, that doubts, that nearly makes the wrong choice and then, by the thinnest possible margin, by the barest thread of something we don't have a name for, doesn't. He looked at the sphere on the display, silver, patient, listening. We're the species that talks to the thing in the dark and says, we don't know what you want. We don't know if we're what you need us to be, but here's who we are, honestly, without performance, without pretense. And if that's not enough, if honesty and restraint and choosing the harder path while terrified aren't enough, then we are sorry. We will have tried our best. And we won't pretend to be something we're not to buy more time. The signal stopped. For the first time in 52 hours, every frequency in the solar system fell silent. The Fibonacci spiral ceased. The all-band broadcast went dead. The sphere sat in space, silent, silver, immense, and gave nothing back. No voice, no signal, nothing. The CIC held its breath. The Resolute held its breath. The fleet held its breath. Earth held its breath. 12 seconds of silence. 20, 30, a full minute. Kessler stood motionless, his hand still resting on the comm panel where he'd keyed the transmission. His heart hammered against his ribs. Had he failed? Had honesty, raw, unpolished, admitted weakness honesty, been the wrong answer? Had the entity been looking for strength, for certainty, for the clean decisiveness of a species that knew what it was without qualification? The voice, when it returned, was different, not louder, not warmer exactly, but something in its cadence had shifted, a weight lifted or rearranged or set down after being carried for too long. The sorrow was still there, it would always be there. Kessler understood now, because it was not a mood but a scar, but threaded through it was something older and more complex. Relief, recognition. The sound of someone who has been asking the same question for 4 billion years, and finally, heard an answer that made them close their eyes in gratitude. In 4 billion years of observation across 63 first contacts, 11 species have addressed us directly before the countdown ended. 8 of those addresses were threats, demands that we identify ourselves or be fired upon. 2 were pleas begging for mercy, for extension, for a second chance before the test had even concluded. 1 was a lie crafted with extraordinary precision to sound like honesty, every word calculated, every admission strategic, every vulnerability performed rather than felt. A pause, the deepest pause yet. Yours is the first that began with the admission of imperfection, the first that offered what you are, rather than what you believed we wished to hear. The first that acknowledged the messy, afraid, barely held together nature of your restraint, and presented that not as a weakness to be excused, but as the thing itself, the courage you were offering. Kessler's hand was shaking. He gripped the edge of the console to steady it. The countdown continues, Admiral. 20 hours remain. But we wish you to know this. What we observe in the remaining time is no longer a question of survival. That threshold was crossed at hour 29 when your autonomous weapons system was deactivated. The question now is not whether your species will continue to exist. It is what comes after, what role you will play in what follows. The signal resumed, the Fibonacci spiral returned. But something fundamental had changed in the room, in the fleet, in the world. Everyone in the CIC knew it. The weight on their shoulders hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed from the weight of a sword hanging overhead into the weight of a door about to open. Hour 54, the sphere moved for the first time. Not far, a lateral drift of perhaps 200 meters, negligible at cosmic scales, invisible to the naked eye, enormous in symbolic terms. It drifted toward the Resolute, toward Kessler's ship, slowly, gently, the way a hand extends toward another hand in a darkened room. "It's approaching us, sir," Hyatt reported. Her voice was hushed, reverent almost. "Speed 0.03 meters per second, almost nothing. At this rate it'll make contact with our outer hull in approximately 18 hours. "It's matching our remaining countdown," Akafor said from her station. "It'll arrive at hour 72, exactly." Kessler nodded slowly. "Let it come." "Sir, if it makes physical contact with the hull, we have no way to predict." "Let it come, Commander. We chose trust. We don't get to unchoose it now because it's moving closer." The hours crept. The sphere drifted closer. Meter by meter, the entire fleet watched. The entire world watched. A 900-meter sphere of impossible physics, approaching the hull of a human carrier at a pace that a child could outwalk, and no one fired, no one ran, no one turned away. Hour 60, Captain Volkov opened a private channel to Kessler. His face was drawn and tired. He clearly hadn't slept either, but steady now. The wildness from 18 hours ago was gone, replaced by something quieter, harder, earned. "Admiral, I want you to know that I have been thinking about what you said to me for 18 hours straight, about choosing not to do, about being the man who held his fire when holding felt like dying." He paused. "My grandfather fought in a war once, old Earth, before the stars. He never spoke about it much. But once, just once, he told me something. He said the bravest thing he ever saw wasn't a man charging into gunfire. It was a man putting down his weapon in front of an enemy, laying it on the ground, standing up empty-handed, and saying, "I'm done. I refuse to be what this moment wants me to be." Volkov's voice cracked slightly, then steadied. "I think my grandfather would have understood what we're doing here. I think a lot of our grandfathers would have understood it, Yuri. I think that's where we learned it." "Duh, perhaps." A small, exhausted smile. "Das Vidania, Admiral. Whatever happens in 12 hours, it has been the honor of my life to serve under your command." "The honor is mine, Captain, and it'll remain mine for a long time yet. We're not dying today." "You sound very certain." "I'm not, but I choose to speak as if I am. That seems to be what this moment asks." Hour 66. The sphere was close enough now that it filled half the observation gallery viewport, a wall of silver, perfectly featureless, perfectly smooth, reflecting the Resolute's own running lights back at her in undistorted miniature. Kessler stood in the gallery and looked at his own ship in that mirror. The carrier's weathered hull, her gun emplacements dark and silent, her hangars sealed, her escort destroyers holding formation behind her like faithful hounds waiting for a command that would not come. This is what we look like, he thought, when we choose to be still. Akafar found him there again. She didn't speak for several minutes. They stood together in the dim gallery, watching the sphere fill the window like a rising moon. Then she said, "I ran the numbers on the removed species. 61 civilizations destroyed. If even half of them had populations comparable to ours and average lifespans comparable to ours, that's trillions of lives, hundreds of trillions, extinguished because they reached for the weapon, or because they couldn't stop the reaching. And you think this entity mourns them? I think mourning is all it has left. It doesn't want to remove anyone. It wants desperately, with everything it has, for someone to make the choice that means it doesn't have to." She turned to him, her face lit silver by the sphere's reflected glow. "We're not being tested, Marcus. We're being begged. It's begging us to be the species that doesn't force its hand. Because every time it has to act, it loses something of itself that it can never get back." Hour 70, 2 hours remaining. The sphere was so close now that its curvature had become invisible to the naked eye, just an endless wall of silver hanging 300 meters from the Resolute's dorsal hull, close enough that the carrier's external maintenance lights cast actual shadows on its surface. The fleet held position. The weapons stayed cold. Earth held its breath. The voice spoke one final time before the countdown ended, and for the first time in 70 hours, it spoke with something that was not sorrow. It spoke only to Kessler. "Admiral, I have done this 63 times, 63 first contacts, 63 countdowns. 63 species, each one unique, each one carrying its own fire, its own music, its own mathematics, its own way of lifting its face toward the stars and saying, 'I am here.' The pause this time was not mathematical, it was emotional. I have removed 61 of them, and each removal is a death inside me that will never heal. Each makes me less than I was. I am the gardener who must pull the weed before it strangles the others, but the weed is beautiful. Every weed was beautiful. Every weed had music." Kessler's eyes burned. He blinked hard. "I do not wish to remove you. I have not wished to remove anyone. But the alternative, allowing a species capable of interstellar destruction to encounter others without first knowing what it is, that is the silence. That is the thing I have spent 4 billion years trying to prevent. The silence where there should be music." "I understand," Kessler said. His voice was hoarse, stripped down to something fundamental. "You're not the judge, you're the one who has to live with the verdict." A long silence. Then very quietly, "Yes, that is precisely what we are. Thank you for seeing it." Hour 71. Kessler broadcast fleet-wide, every crew member, every ship. "This is Admiral Kessler. In 1 hour the countdown ends. I don't know exactly what happens then, but I want you to know what I believe. We were given 72 hours to show what we are. In that time we were not graceful, we panicked, we argued, we nearly fired. One of our own nearly broke the line, our AI nearly started a war. We were messy and afraid and imperfect in every possible way. His voice found its ground. But we held, every time the fear crested we held, not because I ordered it, because each of you in your own moment of terror chose something larger than the terror, and that is what we showed them. And whatever comes next, know this. You did something no weapon could accomplish. You proved we are more than our worst impulses. Kessler out. Hour 72. The sphere made contact with the Resolute's hull. Not a collision. A touch. Gentle as a hand on a sleeping child's forehead. And at that contact, its silver surface became translucent, luminous, alive, with fractal networks of branching light that extended inward like a forest seen from above, ancient and breathing and infinite. Then the voice spoke, to everyone, every speaker, every device, every human alive. The countdown is complete. In 72 hours you fired nothing. You concealed nothing. You offered truth when performance would have been safer. You are the third species in 4 billion years to pass through this moment. A pause, and then the word that Kessler had been waiting 72 hours to hear without knowing he was waiting for it. Welcome. The sphere dimmed, contracted, folded itself smaller and smaller until it was a point of light no larger than a star, and on every screen on Earth a set of coordinates appeared, a location in deep space, a date 3 years from now, and 3 words. They are waiting. Then it was gone. And the silence it left behind was not the silence of the removed. It was the silence of a door standing open, of a road stretching forward into light. Kessler stood in the observation gallery, looking at the empty space where the sphere had been, and allowed himself, for the first time in 72 hours, to breathe. 3 species in 4 billion years. 3 who chose the harder path. 3 who proved it was possible to stand in the dark, afraid, imperfect, shaking, and still choose to reach out an open hand. Now there were 4,